All right, well, I would say that Syracuse pulled off the unthinkable, but if you've watched Clemson these past couple weeks, what they did was actually kind of thinkable. Going into Clemson and pulling off a 34 to 21 victory. If you would have told me 5 years ago that Syracuse walked into Clemson, walked into Death Valley, and won by multiple possessions and hung 34 on the Tigers, I would have thought you were insane. That happened today. I'm going to break this game down from a bunch of different angles here, but a principle that I adhere to on this show is that I always start by talking about winners. We're not going to make any exception here, even though I have a lot to say about Clemson. Syracuse, Fran Brown's squad was prepared once again. Fran Brown's squad had moxie again. They had aura again. They played with great effort from start to finish. And what impressed me the most about this victory is that there are different elements that Syracuse had to deal with. This game was on a weather delay for a while. And Syracuse was cooking. They were in rhythm. They had a lead on Clemson. But we've seen it happen to so many teams in the past, not only in college football, but the NFL as well, when you have a rain delay or the lights go out, like in the Super Bowl 47. The momentum can shift just from sitting in the locker room, just from sitting around and getting cold, and then you got to warm your body back up again, get back into that rhythm. And then you play with your head too. Sometimes if you were cooking and then you sit for a bit and you try to play again, you get the yips because then you're comparing yourself to what you were on the field before the delay. That wasn't the case with Syracuse. They kept cooking. More adversity. Steve Angeli went down in what's feared to potentially be an Achilles injury. And I'm praying to God that Steve Angeli's okay because he's been having a great year at Syracuse. He's fit like a glove in that offense so far. He went 18 for 31 for 244 passing yards and 2 tutties before he went out. So my heart sunk when he went down. So Ricky Collins had to come in, and Syracuse picked up where they left off, and they were able to put the bow on this game, if you will, put it across the finish line, and complete the victory. That's what Fran Brown's Syracuse Orange do. Beating a ranked team last year as well. Miami, final week of the year. I mean, this is becoming a thing for Syracuse, and then going into Clemson and pulling this one off this weekend. This is becoming a thing for Syracuse. I mean, we've got to admit it at this point. They can compete toe to toe with the best of the best in the ACC, and that's going to start to become the standard for this team. I think they're going to emerge here sooner rather than later. I love what Fran Brown is cooking in Central New York right now. As an upstate New Yorker, initially, that's where I'm from. I'm proud of that. So, tip of my cap to Fran Brown. All right, now we got that established. We're going to talk about Clemson. We're going to talk quite a bit about Clemson here, as they've now fallen to 1-3 on this young season. But when you have 3 losses, and you're in the ACC, it's not that you're most likely done. You are done. You're cooked. There will be no Clemson Tigers in the CFP this year. So Clemson fans can relax about that. That's one less thing that's on their plate. It's one less thing that they have to worry about. I owe y'all an apology. Okay? I owe, all my fans, everybody who watches this channel every week, an apology. Because I try to come on here and be credible, be trustworthy, be informative, reliable. And I'll be honest, I'll be transparent, y'all. I let you down. I let you down here. Because like a lot of people in the media did, I'm guilty of this myself. I hold myself accountable. I built Clemson up. Okay? I put Clemson on a pedestal before they took a snap this year. And what Clemson did is they taught me a lesson, a harsh lesson. It's a tough pill to swallow here on how I'm going to evaluate teams moving forward and a mistake that I made in the past. A stat that I always look to and rely on when evaluating teams in the offseason is returning production. You heard the number get thrown around a lot. Clemson has an 81% returning production coming into this year. I looked at that and I thought that was a viable indicator of what Clemson's success is going to be this year. I got to do myself a favor, not only for myself, but for everybody who watches this channel. I've got to just throw it out the window. Because I'm judging a team, I'm predicting a team's performance on the assumption that just because they have a decent amount of guys returning from last season into this season, that over the course of 6 months, they're going to be totally different dudes. This will be a totally different team. I neglected to remember the fact that Clemson, I'm gonna shoot straight here. Clemson tripped into the ACC championship last year. They had no business being there. That should have been SMU and Miami. Miami couldn't get it done against Syracuse, and Clemson essentially tripped into the ACC championship. They lost to South Carolina the week before. South Carolina somehow didn't make the playoff. Clemson wins the ACC championship. Them and SMU both get in. They played Texas in the CFP. For a lot of that game, the Longhorns outclassed them, but Clemson made a little push at the end, and we remembered that. We remembered that they kept it somewhat close and looked decent in the game. Cade Klubnik looked decent. He did against SMU as well. Now, Clemson came up to a huge lead against SMU, and we were like, maybe this is something that this team can build off of. Right? Maybe Clemson can use this momentum and translate it into 2025 seamlessly. Well, I just don't think that's something that's realistic. I don't think that's something that happens. And I have to stop subscribing. I myself have to stop subscribing to that belief because it's just not true. It's not accurate. At one point, either June or July, I compared Clemson to Michigan in 2023 and Ohio State in 2024 because they returned a lot of guys and they had the option to go to the NFL and they stayed to compete for a national championship with each other once more. The difference with those two teams is that, well, Michigan was in the Fiesta Bowl. They were in the CFP the year before 2023. They beat Ohio State. They won the Big Ten. Ohio State in 2023, they were a couple plays away from going to the Big Ten championship and going to the CFP. They lost to Michigan. But they were right there. They would have had business in the CFP, if you ask me. And if that were an 8 or a 12 team playoff in 2023, I think Ohio State could have done some damage. I can't say the same about Clemson last year because we actually had a 12 team playoff and they lost in the first round on the road in Austin against the Longhorns. I promise y'all, I'm not going to evaluate teams in the offseason now. I'm not going to put teams on a pedestal because they have a lot of return production and because they look kind of promising at the end of the previous season. I have to judge these teams for who they are. Teams show you who they are. Guys show you who they are. Just because you go through spring ball and fall camp again, you're not going to just suddenly become this new team. You usually are who you are. And I have to accept that and utilize that ideology moving forward. So for anybody that I misled by having Clemson in the national championship, I thoroughly apologize because I'm wrong. And when I'm wrong on this channel, I'm going to hold myself to that. Those are just my principles. Clemson. Dabo Sweeney. This is a mentality thing. Once you let the mentality of we're great because of what we've done in the past seep into the building, complacency spreads like wildfire. And that's where Clemson is at right now. Nick Saban said it perfectly on College Game Day. You're only as good as your last win. One of my favorite lines ever from Tom Brady is, what's my favorite ring? The next one. That's the mentality that wins championships. That's the mentality that leads to sustainable success. That is not the mentality that exists in Clemson right now. Clemson is in what I like to call rest on your laurels mode. they're resting on what they've done in 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. Those years. In that building, they believe that their reputation hinges on what they did back then, when the reality is, no, quite frankly, nobody gives a shit anymore. It's 2025. The last time Clemson was in a national championship, I was still at Siena College. I had yet to transfer to the University of Alabama. That's how long it's been. And I hate to say it, but until some major changes are made, until Dabo Sweeney and his staff and this program, this organization decide to adapt and evolve, tap into the transfer portal a little bit more, and I'll be honest, get better at recruiting. Right now for 2026, I believe Clemson's at 15th. You got to bring higher quality players in and pair it with the transfer portal. Like, look at what A&M has done so far this year. That's the recipe that team like Clemson has to use. And until they embody that, until they do that, Clemson is going to continue to trek on this trajectory, the downward spiral. And I hate to see it, because Clemson's a team I've always loved. I've always respected Dabo Sweeney. He's honestly one of the people in college football that I've looked up to because he does it his way. He's authentic. He doesn't give a shit what anybody thinks about him. And I love that. He's a guy that wears his heart on his sleeve. I love Dabo Sweeney ever since he had that bring your own guts quote back in, I believe that was 2015. I've always loved this program because they just do it different. And it's true. They just do it different in Clemson. And you can keep that identity, but also adapt to what college football is now. You can't build a team like you did back in 2018. You have to be a chameleon and blend in to how it's done in 2025, because quite frankly, it's different now. But when you're living in the past, you can't perform in the present, and that's how you end up starting a season 1-3. And as a team that had championship aspirations, your CFP chances as of today are now officially cooked. And I don't think there's anything that Clemson can do the rest of this season to rebound and to get back into that college football playoff conversation. I don't even know if winning the ACC can do it, quite frankly. Maybe. I don't know if this is their last loss. I mean, they look lethargic, and they look like they don't care. And that trickles down from the top. And that's scary, because that's something I never saw of Clemson in the past. That was never a concern of mine back in 2018, 2019. They were a gold standard team. They were like an Alabama. They were like a Georgia. They were like an Oklahoma back then. That's who they were. And you expected that week in, week out. You expected that production. You expected that character. That's who Clemson was. That's not who they are right now. They're sleepwalking out there. They're missing tackles. They're unprepared. They're sulking on the sidelines, crying on the sidelines in some instances. This is not 2018 Clemson. And unless you can make the course corrections to not only your culture, but your approach as a program in 2025, that's what's going to continue to be the reality. And I thought about this after this game ended as well. Just going back to what Dabo said in that interview with the media the other day when he kind of snapped. Maybe he's onto something. Maybe he is getting towards the end when it comes to his time at Clemson. And usually I'm on the coach's side, usually I'm on the player's side when it comes to press conferences and quotes, because the media tries to bait coaches and players into saying things they don't want to say. But Dabo, that reporter didn't even ask Dabo anything related to what he went off about in that interview. He spewed. And there are multiple times where he said, if Clemson don't want me anymore, they can replace me with somebody else. I'll go somewhere else. I'm not going to the beach. I want to continue coaching. And you know who that reminded me of? It reminded me of Coach Cal towards the end of his time at Kentucky. Fantastic run. Something that you're going to treasure forever. Like watching Kentucky basketball growing up was amazing. Some of the guys you saw come through there. I mean, Anthony Davis, Devin Booker. You saw some dogs come through Kentucky and some amazing teams. But once Kentucky lost that round of 64 game to Oakland, there's just this feel within the fan base and within Coach Cal's head that it's done. You just felt it. You knew it was done. It was a fantastic run, but it was time to file the divorce papers and move on. Make the separation. I had that same feeling with Dabo and Clemson right now. I think the fan base is getting agitated with him. I think he's getting agitated with the fan base. There's some animosity there, and you saw that with Coach Cal in Kentucky. There was kind of a feud. There was some animosity between him and that Kentucky fan base. And I'm seeing the same thing with Dabo and Clemson. I think this might be the end for Dabo and Clemson. I do. But it's not the end of Dabo. I think that Dabo does go on to another program and continues to coach and continues to succeed like Coach Cal is at Arkansas. But right now, just assessing the temperature in the room, I think that that's where you're at. So that's mostly everything they have to say about Clemson. There's not much more to say. I'm not going to have much more to say about them for the rest of the season. They've really disappointed me. I had high hopes for Clemson, and that's my fault. I hold myself accountable for that. I'm not going to say I'm not mad, I'm disappointed. I'm mad. I'm very mad about this. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens with this program and with Dabo going on the line here. I do think that the separation takes place at the end of this season, but it's only up from here when it comes to Fran Brown and his Syracuse Orange. Let me know what y'all think about this video and everything I said in the comment section below. Thank y'all for watching. Have a great day.